So, hey, thank you everybody for taking a couple of minutes to learn about kind of application control and hear from our customer Omid. And Carl, thanks for jumping on here as well. So, if you don't know me, my name is Sean Brown. I'm the COO and president here at Snaptech IT, and we've got a great webinar for you guys today. We've got Ardabili Engineering. Omid from there is going to come on and kind of give us his story and talk a little bit about application control. And if you've just joined, one last little housekeeping thing is we've got a ton of content and information about not only application control, but some of the other kind of cyber defense kind of solutions that we have in place. A lot of great educational resource, and so you can go out to snaptechit.com/resources, and there's a ton of great information on there. So with that, Carl?
Yeah, you bet. Well, so first of all, I just want to get a level set. This webinar is for our customers. And so you all know us, you know what we do and the things we're working on. And as we looked across our customers, we saw that there's two really important changes that have happened in the last few years in IT and cybersecurity defense. And when we engage new customers like Omid, who's been with us for about a year, these are actually things that we do by default now. And so many of you who have been with us more than that don't have some of these newer solutions because we spent time, we've been working on this application control, for instance, for about 3 years and getting it exactly right. And so it does what we need to do, but it also doesn't make it a problem or a burden for your organization. And there's really two major things that this entire year, we'd just like you to ask each of you to consider and focus on whether this makes sense for your organization, because we feel that if we don't recommend these things, we're not really doing our job as your trusted advisor, as your IT company, saying, hey, there's new types of attacks. The MO has changed. The traditional firewall, antivirus, and permission and backup approach still is valid, but there's new types of attacks that we have to have the ability to control, to see and do. And so we're really asking you to look at two things this year. And so we've done these two webinars. Last month, we did one on our managed detect and response offering, our MDR, which we're seeing a lot of cyber insurance companies now asking and requiring that you have in place in order to continue to maintain insurance. And then this application control is a very new concept, but we've seen nothing really better from the protection standpoint of keeping things from running in your company that you don't want to run than this application control. So that's the groundwork that we're working on. And by the way, this whole webinar is maybe 30 minutes max. That's the goal. So this isn't going to be a big lengthy discussion with a bunch of nerdery, but we're going to do our best to make sure that you understand why it is we're talking about it and why we want you to think about whether this makes sense for your organization. So with that, let's head in, let's dive in. So once again, welcome to Omid Ardabili of Ardabili Engineering. Thank you for joining us. Omid has had a very exciting growth in his company since I first met him a few years back, and they came on as a client about a year ago. And so I'll let Omid just introduce himself and his company a little bit, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Sean, again. So my name is Omid Ardabili. I'm a CEO of Ardabili Engineering. We are an engineering company that provides mechanical, electrical, and plumbing construction document for construction industry. We started about 10 years ago. We have 4 locations, 2 domestically and 2 internationally. And we have 50 employees, and part of our job requires a lot of design software and calculation software that we use on a daily basis. And we start working with Snaptech, actually been partnered a year ago.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Omid. Appreciate it. It's a very exciting, fast-growing company. I think you are double the size when I first met you than you used to be.
Yes. Last year, about this time, we were about 25 employees, and now company-wide, we are a little over 50.
Well, congratulations, and I'm sure it's a great team you've got there that's making that happen.
Thanks.
All right. I need my clicker, Sean, to click. You got it. There we go.
I clicked it. You're good.
Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about the RDB engineering case. They had some experience, some challenges that things were going down. And Omid, I'll run through this and just ask you to chime in and comment on this. You had problems where you had not really fully outsourced IT, and so you had, for instance, the head of your mechanical engineering department was also acting under IT, and it was bogging down their ability to get their main job done while they were handling these IT things. They also, there's a lot of concern around security and potential company data would fall into the wrong hands. Also, you were using a data sync product called Ignite, which we happen to use internally as well, for a way to share files between locations that you can work on in the various design programs, the CAD programs, the 3D modeling programs that you do. And so that required a specific, robust way to set that up, and that had been a challenge as well. And then you also were concerned a lot about your email and the potential security compromises, and you'd seen a big uptick in spoofed emails, and a lot of additional risk was coming in there. So does that about kind of sum up where you guys were at when we engaged?
Yeah, definitely. One of the major issue we had that our key employees, our electrical department head and mechanical department head, was they were very involved in IT because their designers and engineers under them, when they had an issue with the computer, then they would just drop everything and try to fix the issue. And that had a huge impact on our operation. We're spending a lot of hours on the IT and make sure the operation is going smoothly and actually they were doing their the day job.
Yeah, great. Well, that kind of sets the stage. So let's talk about where we went from there. So we saw an assessment as our beginning step, and that's typically how we operate. That's usually the best way is go and learn what we have. So we did an assessment on your organization, and we found a couple of things from a cybersecurity standpoint that we felt could be improved upon. For instance, we did see that you had some multi-factor authentication in place on your Office 365, but not all. And that was a challenge because if it's not really everywhere, then you still have the risk. You've just maybe slightly reduced it for some accounts, but it kind of needs to be across the board for it to work. The other settings of Office 365 and security were not great either. You had spam filtering in place, but none of the additional advanced threat protections, the safe links, the secure URL functionality, the triaging, and the other forms of security you can use with Office 365, none of that had been configured. And then on the workstations from an endpoint protection, you were rolling with just the built-in Windows Defender, which there's plenty of IT people that will say that's a great way to go. In my experience, that leaves a lot to be desired from a protection standpoint. And then you had user policies in place for password management. They're very lenient and not consistently enforced. And so that meant users had passwords that had been around for a very, very long time. And to maybe another thing that's a really important thing to note, specifically as it came to application control, is all your users had administrative access to their local computers, which meant that they would just install their own updates and kind of do their own IT thing when they needed to. And that was causing chaos as you tried to work with files between each other because of the various versions of programming that was going around. And the users really, who knows what they would install, because they could do anything. And the risk there was pretty high.
Don't worry about it. End users never install anything they shouldn't install, Carl.
Yeah, and RDB had never seen an incident with that at all. Well, so that about sums it up, right? So we gave you the report, and then we got into action, right, Omid?
Right. Correct.
So one of the things that was interesting, because you had multiple locations, but your server setup was not really stretching to all locations. So this meant that you didn't have a consistent place for usernames and passwords, or a directory system for logging into computers to control access was not in place across the board. And so we helped you implement a cloud-based one called Azure Active Directory, which we recommend and many of our clients use today. Many of them use it both locally and in the cloud, and some are just in the cloud like you are. Also, we found that although you had a firewall sharing your internet connection, none of the additional security features had been configured. And this is something that will probably sound familiar to a lot of people on this call because they were a similar place when we found them as well. There was issues with the anti-spyware functionality, the Office 365 we talked about, and then the remote system security was an issue about not being able to control the IT side from somebody else at one of the other offices and having a lot of concern about how that might play down or how that might cause extra risk. So from there, we began the process of implementing these. Let's get to the next slide there. All right. So what we're talking about today is something that all of our customers will recognize, or at least should recognize we've mentioned before, because we began testing this about 3 years ago internally, and then we began to offer it about a year and a half ago after we'd done a lot of thorough testing on ourselves, and maybe it's 2 years ago. And then we started, all new customers are automatically around that same time, but a lot of our existing customers, we just in our regular QBR meetings been mentioning, hey, these are things we want you to consider. To be perfectly frank, I think that one of the things you have to recognize is that the traditional endpoint protection that we have, an antivirus, tries to look at things running on your computer and stop the bad things. This application control that we're now talking about actually kind of changes the entire dynamic of how the computer operates, where even if you have administrative login, if you try to install something, if it hasn't been previously approved, meaning it only allows what it knows, then it can't execute. So you can imagine what this does if somebody tries to introduce a script or a web browser add-on or an email that you click that's now trying to take over your computer and do something. That's going to execute some program, some script, some executable, some driver DLL file that won't be on the approved list. And because of that, the application control will stop it from operating. So from a protection standpoint, this is the best thing we've seen going out there. And that's what we're talking about with this application control utility, which really helped RWBLE on 2 factors. One is it really enhanced the security profile and the risk profile, because now your users can't just install anything they want. It have to be pre-approved based on the way this application control system works. And then secondarily, so it kept them from installing things and doing their, they're making their own IT choices, maybe not what the company wants. And it also, of course, stops things like nasty 0-day attacks or things that could potentially blow right past an endpoint protection software, which we've seen. And that's the real message is there's this new types of attack. This is the only thing we really know that can stop that kind of attack that's so unknown that your antivirus software wouldn't recognize it and wouldn't stop it. In fact, usually it thinks that these are normal IT activities happening, and so it just lets it go right by. It's a very sneaky way. And so, Omid, implementing that, what has that meant for your organization?
So it solves a lot of issues, but 2 main one was we use a lot of design software and calculation software. And we get updates on a monthly, sometimes on a weekly basis. And the biggest issue we had, some people would update their software and some people wouldn't. And when we work on a project on different computers or different engineers are working on the same project, it would create issues because we had 2 different updates on the software. So with application control, we resolve that issue. Every time we have an update, Snaptech makes sure that all the software on all the computers, they're on the latest version. So that's one issue. And the next issue was people were just downloading softwares. If there's some software that they thought it was beneficial, they would just go ahead and download it. And we noticed that a lot of these the software that they were downloading start creating issues on their computers. So with application control, that helped us to make sure that we only download the software we need and make sure all the computers have the same software. I'm going to tell this. It was at first it's very frustrating because it's a different mindset and a different kind of a culture, because we all used to jump on a computer, new software, go ahead and do it. And so at the beginning, it was a little difficult. But right now, after a year of doing that, our team has been trained and they know, hey, if there's a software we want to download, contact Synaptic, and they just follow the process, and it kind of has been a relief on a lot of issues that we had previously.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's the truth of it. It's like if your organization has everybody used to doing their own IT, of course they're going to feel like when you start controlling that you're taking something away from them. But what you're really doing is moving them to a consistent environment that's reliable, that performs well, that they essentially can't break, or at least not as easily. And it's just a more programmatic approach, right? And so now it's being run through a process, not everybody kind of making their own choices, good or bad, you know. And it's not about being inflexible, it's just about being systematic and making sure that you have a consistent, that you can count on, right? So I appreciate, because you're right. Anytime we take somebody away from having local admin or ability to install, and they've been doing it for a while, they don't love it at first. But then again, if you ask them X amount of months later, kind of like your experience, it's like, well, you know, to be honest, we don't have as many computer problems. It's drastically reduced. And I say the side benefit from our perspective, like we get really concerned about our customers having the right kind of protection and being able to stop the kind of attacks that are out there. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, there are plenty of companies that get hit with issues from a cybersecurity standpoint. You know, fortunately, from our perspective, that it's not our customers that typically have that, but we do get introduced to companies. Even just this morning, a company called us. They've just been hacked. They've got these issues. And, you know, every one of them, when you talk about, they wish they would have done the proactive thing. They wish they would have taken the advice they were given. They wish they would have done more. So this is your opportunity to think, should I be doing more? Should I be protecting against the new type of attacks with the new type of defense? You know, if that makes sense, and really stepping that up. And so that's what we want to talk about. And I think there's a couple other things I just want to talk about with application control to make sure everybody kind of understands. So it's basically, we install an agent software on each of your computers. And at first, we just put it into listen mode. So it sees everything running on your computer and gives us a list of everything that executes on your computer systems. And then we create policies, and we come to you and say, well, do you want to allow this? Do you not want to allow this? You so forth. After we work that out, then we just basically manage the policy however you want it to happen. And one thing that's, I think, really important to know, like one thing I really like about one of the things we do for ourselves and other customers that have this running in, is there's a feature called ring fencing, where you can say, okay, this program can run, but it can't contact the internet, for instance. Like one of the powerful scripting tools out there that you can do IT things with is called PowerShell. You can do all sorts of powerful things with it, but it's commonly used by attackers. So you can say, yes, PowerShell can run, but it can't talk to anything on the internet, which keeps the attackers from using it, but it still can be used for great IT automation inside your network. Or another use case that I really like is you can say, okay, these 3-4 users in my company can access QuickBooks, but only if it's stored here and they're the only ones that can. Everybody else, they try to run QuickBooks, gets a denied message by this utility. And so this is just ultimate control about what people can run on their computer, rather than the default that everything is allowed to run and you try to use endpoint protection to stop just the bad stuff by recognizing it. This is now nothing runs unless we've told it to run and previously approved it. And so that process is just changing the whole nature, and it's a much more protective stance. So I don't know, Sean, if you had anything else to chime in about that, but I think those are important things to understand about this new utility that we're recommending to our customers.
Yeah, great insight there. You know, Windows inherently is allow everything, and so you're right. This is a whole new just dichotomy of let's deny everything unless we've specifically allowed it to run. So, yep.
The great thing is it's not like it's a thing that you can say causes performance hits or things like that. It definitely causes stuff to not run that's not allowed, but you know, anything that's allowed. I mean, Omid, your experience, have you ever been like, my computer's extra slow now because we have this? I mean, I assume that hasn't been the case.
No, I haven't heard that. It impacted the computer at all. It just a matter of just getting used to that. Hey, they cannot do it. They cannot just go ahead and download any software. So that's the only complaint you hear at the beginning, basically.
Right. Well, and one thing that's I think important to highlight too is the way we configure it is when somebody runs into something that they need to install that hasn't been previously on the approved list, it does pop up a box where you can click a button and say, hey, I'd like to submit this to be approved. And then we receive that automatically. We look at it to make sure it's not something from a security standpoint bad, and then we'll just ask whoever in your organization is your approver do you approve this new application? If you do, then we'll go ahead and make it happen. It's just an extra step to make sure it's checked for security and make sure that your organization actually feels that that person should and needs to run that piece of software that they're requesting. So it's a pretty straightforward process to be able to quickly, easily ask for help if you need something loaded that wasn't previously approved.
I was going to say, Omid, have you had that little pop-up come up when you were trying to install anything and had to request? Have you gone through that experience?
Honestly, since I hired Snaptech, I am not involved in any of these, so I haven't seen that pop up myself. As a business owner, I was very involved in IT just when I started the business, but for past year, I haven't dealt with IT at all. So
yeah, that's the best answer is you don't care. Yeah. Well, that's the aim, is as much as possible to try to make it not obtrusive in any way, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, so this is a great time to say we've kind of said our bit about application control. I hope you guys understand what it is we're talking about, and you're hearing from a customer who's been using it for about a year and their experience with it, how it's helped them kind of tame their environment and help them with some improved security. If there are any questions from you folks, we'd love to hear them. So if anything we can answer, we're happy to do it real quick here. Or if you later, have some questions, you're more than welcome. Just reach out, email us. You probably know your account manager or me or Sean, and we're happy to help as always. So just let us know. Sean, did you see any questions queuing up or something that anybody wanted to ask?
Yeah, so I got one here for you. So how does application control kind of different from endpoint protection?
Okay, so endpoint protection is what we traditionally would call antivirus, although through the years it does more than just fights computer viruses. It's anti-exploit. They have anti-ransomware features built into it. So it's evolved to the term endpoint security. These two, I would say, work complementary to each other because an antivirus tries to find recognized virus files and stop them from running or even coming to your computer. But by the time you go to click on it, you're reliant on that endpoint protection to see it and recognize it as a bad thing and stop it. And we use the best endpoint protection available with our customers with the Sophos Intercept X. It's really excellent. But there are plenty of like normal IT behaviors like installing software that it won't stop and it may not recognize, particularly when there's new stuff arriving or when a hacker has done a social engineer attack like a phishing email, got a password, and they're logging in as a legitimate user. The antivirus software won't see and stop that. So application control is about no matter who's logged in, is this allowed or not allowed? And it's based specifically on whatever's trying to be executed, not just watching for things and trying to stop it. It basically, as we talked about before, fundamentally changes the nature of how the computer works so that only allowed things are allowed to run that have been previously approved.
All right, I got a couple more here. Let's see. Will the recording be available if we can't attend the whole meeting? Yes, it will. So we'll make sure to get that link out to you. Can internal IT staff also approve applications?
Yeah, so it can be set up that way so that, for those that have the internal IT that would like to work with it, that feel like they're capable of doing the security analysis piece, we certainly can set it up that way so that you can see just your computer systems in our system and you can be part of the approval process. We'd recommend that you have a workflow where if that person's out, that you make sure that we know when we might be doing it instead of you. But in general, yes, these things can be accomplished.
All right, I got another one here for you. Would this application control reduce the need for high-end point systems?
High-end point?
Yeah, high-end.
Oh, high-end and high-end point. I think that's a pretty logical connection. High-level endpoint, like for instance, could you go back to Windows Defender for just traditional, simple, very basic, non-centrally managed? I have this opinion. I have a hard time recommending people don't get good endpoint protection. Maybe in the future that I will get there, but I will say that the way this thing functions, it makes the endpoint protection role a little bit less important. And so it's a tough call, because I'd hate to like have an issue and then say, well, if we'd had this running, that it would have been better. And so I really do still think that right now we're going to go with you need both. But I could see the logic, and I think that makes sense. And maybe someday that will make sense, that you can reduce the endpoint to something more basic and a lot less expensive, and just have good application control in place. I just have a hard time with that recommendation. Like, for instance, what if it's your own IT person and they approve something because they didn't pay attention that day and didn't really, then you got nothing to catch that. So maybe that endpoint could have caught it. It's hard to say that you shouldn't have a traditional form of protection out there, just because a new one's coming out. So in our opinion, I think you got to do both, at least for the time being. You want good endpoint protection and application control.
All right, got one more. How would you be able to request an application be allowed?
Oh, so whenever you're going to run it, you get a pop-up.
Maybe just go all the way to the beginning and talk about learning mode just for a second, and just hit that real quick again.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. So first of all, we first deploy the agent software, and it starts recording everything that's running, because we'll put it in what's called learning mode, where it's not blocking anything. It's just learning what's running on your system, so that we can learn what you traditionally run, because that list is actually pretty long. You surprised, it's thousands per computer of the various files that might do something. And so to get a very comprehensive list, we let that learning mode run for a while, 2, 3, 4 weeks, sometimes longer, depending on what we think makes sense for your organization and when you run different programs. But once we have it where we feel like the list is good, then we put it into hard stop mode, where now we set it to only approve the things that we've all agreed on, and now it will block anything new. So now you're in a spot where your computer is blocking something that's new. You can do a couple of things. One, you can say, hey, I know I'm about to install a new software that's not previously on the list. You could just request, or if you're an IT guy working the system with us, you can put that computer into what's called learning mode again, just for a time frame, like maybe an hour. And then you install that software you want to install, you name that application what it's going to be, and then you close up learning mode, and then you can apply that policy to your entire company across the board. In fact, what we're doing is, when we see an application that we generally think is okay and safe for any customer, barring things like there's a set of traditional ones that kind of everybody has, Microsoft Office, Adobe Reader, we just take care of those across the board. We can apply it in one place and apply it to all of our customers as well, which is very convenient from a management standpoint. But the whole process, you can put it into learning mode. But if you're ever an end user and you're trying to install something and you don't know, or you get a message saying that it's blocked, there's a button right there where you can say request access to this application, which alerts our security operations team, who then quickly looks at it. They evaluate the software from a risk standpoint, and then they ask for permission from whoever your change approver is to actually implement it. And if that, assuming that's approved, then we'll put the computer into learning mode, and then we'll go through the process of getting that application installed, recorded, and approved as a policy. Usually we're going to approve it across the board, unless you tell us, oh no, only these 2 users get that application. But if it's something that everybody's going to need, we just with one button can apply it to everybody as learned, if that makes sense. And that's the system that makes this really a lot easier to manage, is that we don't have to do this actually individually every computer. Once we learn something somewhere, we can make it apply elsewhere.
All right, I got another one for you. This is a good one, because this is the way I like to approach almost any new customers that we start working with, is just assume that there's some breach already in the environment. So the question is, how do you eliminate existing rogue processes that might be running during learning mode?
Yeah, fantastic question, and something that's definitely our mentality. We have definitely had the experience of coming into a location and putting in security software and finding something that's already been there as we're onboarding. And so our perspective is, anytime we connect to anything and do anything, we assume that is by default the case, which means that before we go into cutover mode, while in learning mode, that list is thoroughly vetted and reviewed as part of our implementation process. And then we bring the list to you of the things that have been security approved by us, and say, which of these do you actually want or don't want? Some of it's pretty obvious and we all know what's going to happen, but sometimes there's questionable things. But we actually get a list in the learning mode process across the board And we don't put anything, we don't let anything stay on that list or go into that policy without us going through it and validating it. It's a really solid question, because if you just rip this out there and said, learn for 2 weeks, and then said policy, just do whatever's run, you could by default be allowing a bad thing to run. Absolutely, totally. And so it absolutely needs to be administered correctly and deployed correctly.
Great question. All right, got another one. What is the ballpark cost per endpoint for application control?
$10 a user. That's not ballpark, that is the cost.
Yep.
$10 a user a month.
And then there is a little setup fee, because we do put that into learning mode, and just some of the things that we kind of described, it does take a little bit of time to vet all that software and get everything kind of pushed out and ready to go. But relatively pretty small little project there.
Yeah, and for a company with, say, 25 users, that means about another $250 a month. Obviously, everybody can do the math pretty quick on $10, right? And that cost does include the cost of the licensing of the software of the tool we're using, and the labor involved in the ongoing management that it adds to our plate when we add that on. There are additional requests we now get once we do that. And so it's really mixed cost. We've just kind of boiled it down to one per user price that involves the licensing of the software and involves our management of it, or part of that management.
And the follow-up question, yes, that is a per month pricing.
Yes, per user.
Per month, per user. Yeah, great. All right. If anybody has any other questions, what a great group of questions we had today. So I really appreciate that. Looks like we've kind of gone over just a little bit, but that's okay, because we had some really good questions. Carl, closing remarks? Anything you want to highlight on?
Yeah, so just real quick, just at a high level, we're focusing on two things. One is the managed detect and response, which is an enhancement to your endpoint protection that includes some logging, some other features that if you don't have, and there's visibility we don't have into things like cloud things and things going on in network devices in your network. And then this application control, those are the two things that we really think you got to think really hard whether those belong in your environment, because those are the best tools we know to prevent the type of attacks that are happening today. I just highly encourage you to see the importance that we're trying to say. We're not going to make there are plenty of other recommendations we could make for any of you for many things that you need. There's some that I would put into nice to know. It'd be nice to get that risk out, but we're getting to the point where we feel like these are very fundamental tools that we need to protect our customers. And so that's why we're doing this. That's why this message is out there. This isn't about just trying to see if we can get more customers on the utilities. All of you here are already our customer, but we really need you to consider these offers, because there's a significant risk reduction with both of these utilities that we're putting forward. And that's all we're really going to ask you to do this year. There might be other things that come up in the future, other things but this is where we're at, and this is something we put a lot of time and effort and years into figuring out that this is the right way to go. And we've seen it really, like with Omid has expressed, have a lot of benefits in an environment because of the level of security and the control that it brings. And so thank you all for coming. Thank you for being our customer. Thank you for hearing us out. We feel it's our duty and responsibility to give you the kind of advice to let you know what you need to know, particularly from a cybersecurity. We feel there's nothing more important you ask us to do than to make sure your computer systems run well and that your data is safe and secure. And so that's why we're doing this, because it's our responsibility as your vendor. And then the other thing is this is a fun side thing for those of you that are in the Atlanta area, or you know what, if you're in Phoenix or California or other spots, you're more than welcome to fly to Atlanta to go to this too. We have a pretty cool thing where we have an actual FBI cybersecurity expert joining us for an in-person event at the Capitol Grill. Sean, maybe you can share a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so we're excited. We're kicking off some in-person events. This will be our first one. We're going to do it in Dunwoody, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, actually next Wednesday. So we've got an FBI special agent from the FBI that's coming in to talk about some of the recent things that the FBI is seeing from a cybersecurity standpoint. But don't fret. if you're in Phoenix or in California, because keep an eye out, because our plan is to bring some of these in-person events to your markets as well. So don't be surprised if you see something next quarter, hint, hint, that's going to happen in Phoenix.
Yeah, so this is all about just providing educational value, right? And thanking our customers. So hopefully it's a nice dinner for those that can make it, and some content that you find helpful to understand about what you need to do in your business. That's our whole purpose. It's like, how can we take care of our customers better? How can we educate you more? How can you know better about the things that are going on to better reduce the risk in your business? So.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much, Omid. Thank you for taking some time and hanging out with us today and sharing your story. I greatly appreciate it. Carl, as always, thanks for your insight. Again, thanks for everybody for joining us, and we'll see you guys again on the next one. Take care, everybody.
Take care.